Sarah Martinez stood on the deck of her 38-foot fishing vessel, watching the Coast Guard cutter approach through the morning fog. The radio crackled with official commands she had been expecting for weeks. Her weathered hands gripped the wheel as she calculated her options, none of them good. The boat beneath her feet represented everything she had worked for since leaving the military 5 years ago. The Seahawk wasn't just a fishing vessel. It was her home, her business, and her sanctuary. Every plank of wood, every piece of equipment told a story of sacrifice and determination. She had bought it with her military savings and transformed it from a neglected wreck into a profitable charter fishing operation. The approaching Coast Guard vessel cut through the choppy waters with purpose. Sarah could see the serious faces of the crew members as they prepared to board her boat. She knew this wasn't a routine inspection. The legal papers had been served 3 days ago, claiming her vessel was involved in smuggling operations. The accusations were false, but proving innocence in federal waters was a different kind of battle than the ones she had fought overseas. Lieutenant Commander James Peterson stood at the bow of the Coast Guard cutter, reviewing the confiscation order one final time. The intelligence report suggested this particular fishing vessel had been making suspicious trips to international waters, returning with more than just fish. Drug smuggling operations had increased in the region, and several boats matching this description had been flagged by surveillance aircraft. Sarah watched the uniformed officers prepare their boarding equipment. She recognized the routine from her own military experience, though from a different perspective. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was now on the receiving end of a federal operation. Her military training told her to cooperate fully, but her civilian instincts screamed to fight for what was rightfully hers. The waters around them told their own story. These fishing grounds had been her territory for 3 years, and every local fisherman knew her reputation for honest work and fair dealing. She had built relationships with marina owners, bait shops, and restaurants along the coast. Her clients trusted her to provide safe, successful fishing trips, and she had never disappointed them. As the Coast Guard vessel drew closer, Sarah could hear the powerful engines reducing speed. The professional execution of their approach reminded her of her own military operations in foreign waters. She had been on the other side of situations like this, conducting boarding operations and searches in hostile territories. The difference was that this time, she was the target, and her own country's forces were treating her as a potential enemy. The legal documents in her cabin outlined serious federal charges. Possession of a vessel used in drug trafficking carried mandatory minimum sentences that could destroy any chance of rebuilding her life. The evidence against her was circumstantial but troubling. Her boat had been photographed in areas known for smuggling activity. Though she had legitimate reasons for being there, Sarah's military background had taught her to stay calm under pressure. But this situation tested every lesson she had learned about maintaining composure. The life she had carefully constructed since leaving active duty was about to be dismantled by the very government she had served faithfully for 12 years. Her service record was exemplary, but that seemed to matter little in the face of current accusations. The morning sun broke through the fog, illuminating both vessels as they prepared for the confrontation ahead. Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that the next few hours would determine whether she would lose everything she had worked to build. Her hands remained steady on the wheel, but her mind raced through possibilities and strategies for protecting her livelihood and her freedom. The Coast Guard crew completed their approach procedures with military precision. Their radios buzzed with communications back to headquarters, confirming their position and the identity of the target vessel. Lieutenant Commander Peterson raised his bullhorn, preparing to issue the standard commands for a federal boarding operation. Sarah's eyes scanned her boat one last time, taking in the details of her floating home. The fishing equipment she had carefully maintained, the comfortable cabin where she had spent countless peaceful evenings, and the small galley where she had cooked meals for grateful clients who had become friends over the years. Everything she valued was about to be taken away based on accusations she couldn't understand or defend. The distance between the two vessels continued to close, bringing Sarah face to face with a confrontation that would test everything she had learned about courage, honor, and survival. Her military training had prepared her for many challenges, but nothing quite like this moment when her past service and current predicament were about to collide in ways she never could have anticipated. The boarding hook clanged against Sarah's hull as the Coast Guard team secured their vessel alongside hers. Lieutenant Commander Peterson was the first to step aboard. followed by 3 armed petty officers who immediately began positioning themselves around the deck. Their movements were professional but tense, treating Sarah as a potential threat despite her calm demeanor. Sarah raised her hands slightly, making it clear she had no intention of resisting. Her military training kicked in automatically, recognizing the importance of following protocol during a federal boarding operation. She had conducted similar operations herself during her years in the Navy, though those had been in foreign waters against genuine threats to national security. Peterson approached with the confiscation order in hand, his expression stern and official. "Sarah Martinez, I'm Lieutenant Commander Peterson with the United States Coast Guard. We have a federal warrant to search this vessel and seize it as evidence in an ongoing drug trafficking investigation. You need to step away from the controls and allow my team to conduct their search." Sarah nodded calmly, though her heart was racing. "I understand your authority, Commander, but I need you to know that these accusations are completely false. I've been operating a legitimate charter fishing business from this vessel for 3 years. I have all my permits, licenses, and documentation readily available for your inspection." The boarding team spread out across her boat with practiced efficiency. 2 officers headed below deck to search the cabin and storage areas, while another began examining the fishing equipment and external compartments. Sarah watched them work, knowing they would find nothing illegal, but understanding that their discovery of innocence wouldn't necessarily end her ordeal. Peterson examined Sarah carefully as she stood beside the wheel. Something about her posture and response to the boarding operation struck him as unusual for a civilian facing federal charges. Most people in her situation would be panicking, arguing, or demanding lawyers. Instead, she displayed a calm professionalism that reminded him of military personnel he had worked with during joint operations. One of the searching officers emerged from the cabin, holding Sarah's logbooks and documentation. "Commander, everything down here appears legitimate. Fishing licenses, charter permits, client records, and maintenance logs all seem to be in order. No signs of hidden compartments or suspicious modifications to the vessel structure." Sarah seized the opportunity to provide additional context. "Commander, if you check those logs carefully, you'll see that every trip I've taken has been properly documented with client names, departure and return times, and catches recorded. I've never operated outside legal fishing grounds or engaged in any suspicious activities." Peterson reviewed the logbook entries while his team continued their systematic search. The records appeared genuine and detailed, showing a consistent pattern of legitimate fishing operations. Client testimonials and photos documented successful trips, and the maintenance records indicated significant investment in keeping the vessel seaworthy and properly equipped. The officer searching the engine compartment called out his findings. "No unusual modifications to the engine or fuel systems, Commander. No hidden storage areas or signs of smuggling equipment. This vessel appears to be exactly what it claims to be, a well-maintained fishing charter boat." Sarah felt a small surge of hope as the search continued to turn up nothing incriminating. However, she knew that the absence of evidence wouldn't necessarily clear her name. Federal agencies could still proceed with confiscation based on circumstantial evidence and surveillance reports, leaving her to fight the charges through expensive legal proceedings. Peterson found himself puzzled by the discrepancy between the intelligence reports and what his team was discovering. The surveillance photographs had clearly shown this vessel in areas known for smuggling activity, yet everything about the boat and its owner suggested legitimate operations. He began to question whether they had the right target. The radio on Peterson's shoulder crackled with an update from Coast Guard headquarters. "Boarding Team Alpha, please confirm vessel identification and operator credentials. We're receiving additional intelligence that may affect your operation." The message added another layer of complexity to an already confusing situation. Sarah overheard the radio communication and realized that additional information was being processed about her case. She wondered if someone had finally discovered her military background and service record. Her Navy credentials weren't something she advertised in her civilian life, but they were part of her official federal records. The systematic search of her vessel continued with military precision. Every compartment, storage area, and piece of equipment was thoroughly examined. Sarah appreciated their professionalism even as she worried about the outcome. These Coast Guard personnel were doing their jobs correctly, following proper procedures for a federal investigation. Peterson noticed Sarah's calm observation of the search process. Most civilians would be demanding explanations or becoming increasingly agitated as strangers dismantled their possessions. Instead, she watched with the detached interest of someone familiar with military operations, occasionally offering helpful information about hidden switches or storage compartments. The officer checking the fishing equipment made another discovery. "Commander, these nets and lines show heavy use consistent with regular fishing operations. The wear patterns and repairs indicate genuine commercial fishing activity over an extended period. No signs of modification for smuggling purposes." As the search neared completion, Peterson found himself facing an uncomfortable reality. Either the intelligence reports were wrong, or this woman was operating a sophisticated cover for illegal activities. Her calm demeanor and the legitimacy of her operations suggested the former. But federal agencies didn't usually make mistakes about surveillance evidence. The morning sun climbed higher as the boarding operation continued, casting long shadows across both vessels. Sarah maintained her composure while silently calculating the financial impact of losing her boat and business. Even if she was eventually cleared of all charges, the legal costs and lost income could destroy everything she had worked to build. Peterson's radio crackled again with another message from headquarters. This time, the communication was longer and appeared to contain information that surprised him. Sarah watched his expression change as he listened to the transmission, wondering if her military service record had finally surfaced in their background investigation. Peterson lowered his radio slowly, his expression shifting from official sternness to something resembling confusion, mixed with respect. The headquarters transmission had contained information that changed everything about this boarding operation. He looked at Sarah with new understanding, seeing beyond the civilian fishing boat operator to something much more significant. "Ms. Martinez," Peterson said carefully, "Headquarters has just informed me about your military service record. They're telling me you served 12 years in the Navy with Special Operations Command. Is that accurate?" His voice carried a different tone now, one military professional addressing another. Sarah straightened slightly, her civilian facade dropping away to reveal the bearing of a trained warrior. "Yes, Commander. I served as a naval special warfare operator for 12 years before transitioning to civilian life. I didn't think my service record was relevant to these accusations, but I'm glad someone finally bothered to check." The Coast Guard crew members who overheard this exchange looked at each other with surprise. They had been treating Sarah as a potential drug smuggler, but the woman standing before them was a decorated military veteran with top-secret clearance and combat experience. The disconnect between the accusations and her background was becoming impossible to ignore. Peterson felt the weight of the situation shifting dramatically. Naval Special Warfare operators underwent extensive background investigations and psychological evaluations. They were among the most thoroughly vetted personnel in the military, chosen for their integrity as much as their tactical skills. The idea that such a person would risk everything for drug smuggling seemed increasingly unlikely. One of the petty officers emerged from the final compartment search with nothing suspicious to report. "Commander, we've completed a thorough examination of the entire vessel. No contraband, no hidden compartments, no modifications for smuggling. Everything checks out as a legitimate fishing operation with proper documentation and maintenance records." Sarah watched Peterson processing this information while clearly wrestling with the implications. She could see the conflict between his orders to confiscate her vessel and the growing evidence that those orders were based on faulty intelligence. Her military experience told her to remain patient and let the situation develop naturally. The radio crackled again with another transmission from headquarters. This time, Peterson listened for several minutes while taking notes. Sarah noticed his posture becoming more relaxed as he received additional information about her service record and the intelligence reports that had triggered this operation. After the transmission ended, Peterson approached Sarah with obvious discomfort. "Ms. Martinez, I need to ask you some direct questions about your recent activities. Our surveillance reports show your vessel in areas known for smuggling operations. Can you explain why you were operating in those waters?" Sarah felt relief at finally being asked for her side of the story. "Commander, those areas you're referring to are some of the best deep-sea fishing grounds in the region. I take clients there regularly, because that's where we find the trophy fish they're paying for. I have GPS logs, client testimonials, and photographs documenting every trip to those locations. She moved to retrieve a waterproof case from the cabin, with Peterson's permission. Inside were detailed records of her fishing operations, including GPS coordinates, weather conditions, catch records, and client photographs. Every trip to the supposedly suspicious areas was thoroughly documented as legitimate fishing activity. Peterson reviewed the evidence while his team completed their search procedures. The documentation was comprehensive and convincing, showing a pattern of legitimate business operations rather than criminal activity. Each trip to the flagged coordinates corresponded with known fishing seasons and weather patterns, favorable for deep-sea fishing. The headquarters transmission had also revealed that Sarah's military service included operations in counter-narcotics missions overseas. She had actually helped intercept drug smuggling operations during her Navy career, making the current accusations even more ironic. Her service record included commendations for integrity and dedication to duty. Peterson found himself in an uncomfortable position. The confiscation order was based on surveillance evidence and intelligence reports, but everything his team had discovered contradicted those reports. Sarah's military background, documentation, and the physical evidence on her vessel all supported her claims of innocence. Sarah sensed the shift in Peterson's attitude and decided to provide additional context. "Commander, I understand you're following orders based on intelligence reports, but I served my country faithfully for 12 years, and I would never dishonor that service by engaging in criminal activity. This boat represents my honest attempt to build a civilian life after military service." The emotional weight of her words wasn't lost on Peterson, who had his own military background and understood the challenges veterans faced in transitioning to civilian careers. Many veterans struggled to find purpose and financial stability after leaving the service, making Sarah's successful fishing business even more admirable. Another Coast Guard vessel appeared on the horizon, apparently responding to the boarding operation. Peterson realized that additional resources were being deployed based on the original intelligence reports. But the situation had evolved far beyond what anyone at headquarters had anticipated. The morning sun continued to climb, and Sarah's regular clients would soon be expecting to depart for their scheduled fishing trip. The financial impact of this delay was already mounting, regardless of how the situation was eventually resolved. Her reputation in the local fishing community could be permanently damaged by false accusations. Peterson's radio buzzed with another transmission, this one apparently from a higher-ranking officer. He stepped away from Sarah to take the call privately, but she could see from his body language that the conversation was significant. Her military experience reading command dynamics told her that someone with authority was getting involved in the situation. As Peterson concluded his private communication, Sarah prepared herself for whatever decision was coming. Her military training had taught her to accept orders and adapt to changing circumstances, but she had never imagined those lessons would be tested in a confrontation with her own country's forces, over accusations she couldn't understand or anticipate. Peterson returned from his private radio conversation with a completely different demeanor. The official sternness had been replaced by something approaching embarrassment and concern. He looked at Sarah with the respect one military professional shows another, recognizing that a serious mistake had been made. "Ms. Martinez," Peterson began carefully, "I've just spoken with my commanding officer, who has been in contact with Naval Special Warfare Command. Your service record has been fully reviewed, and I'm afraid we owe you a significant apology. The intelligence reports that triggered this operation appear to have been based on mistaken identity." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and frustration wash over her. Relief that her innocence was being acknowledged, but frustration that her military service had been necessary to establish her credibility. She wondered how many other innocent civilians might be facing similar accusations without the benefit of distinguished service records to protect them. The approaching Coast Guard vessel had changed course and was now heading away from their position. Peterson explained that the additional resources had been called off once headquarters realized the magnitude of their error. The surveillance photographs that had triggered the investigation apparently showed a vessel similar to Sarah's, but operating under different circumstances. Peterson's team began securing their equipment and preparing to return to their vessel. The search had been thorough but fruitless, exactly as Sarah had expected. Her boat showed no signs of illegal activity, because there had never been any illegal activity to find. The whole operation had been based on faulty intelligence and mistaken assumptions. Sarah watched the Coast Guard personnel preparing to leave while calculating the damage already done to her business. Word of a federal boarding operation would spread quickly through the tight-knit fishing community. Even though she had been cleared of wrongdoing, some people would always wonder if there had been truth to the accusations. Peterson approached Sarah with obvious discomfort about the situation. "Ms. Martinez, I want you to know that this boarding operation will be noted in our records as based on erroneous intelligence. Your cooperation and professionalism throughout this process have been exemplary. Exactly what I would expect from someone with your military background." The acknowledgement of her service meant something to Sarah, but it couldn't undo the stress and disruption of the morning. Her scheduled clients would be arriving at the marina soon, expecting to depart for their fishing trip. She would need to explain the delay and hope they would understand the circumstances beyond her control. As the Coast Guard team prepared to depart, Peterson offered additional information about the investigation. The actual vessel we should have been looking for was intercepted yesterday evening, about 50 miles south of here. The smugglers were using a boat similar to yours, which explains the confusion in the surveillance reports. Sarah nodded, understanding how such mistakes could happen in law enforcement operations. During her military service, she had seen similar cases of mistaken identity and faulty intelligence. The difference was that those mistakes usually occurred in foreign countries against potential enemies, not against decorated veterans in their own homeland. The radio chatter between the Coast Guard vessels indicated that the operation was being officially terminated. Peterson would need to file detailed reports explaining the mistaken boarding and the discovery of Sarah's military credentials. The paperwork would be extensive, but it would also create an official record clearing her of any wrongdoing. Sarah felt the tension leaving her body as the immediate threat to her livelihood disappeared. However, she knew that the emotional impact of the morning would linger for some time. Being treated as a criminal by her own country's forces had been more painful than any physical hardship she had endured during military service. Peterson seemed to understand the broader implications of what had happened. "Ms. Martinez, I know this morning has been difficult for you, and I want to ensure that this incident doesn't damage your business or reputation. I'll make sure our reports clearly indicate that you were completely cooperative and that no evidence of wrongdoing was found." The offer was appreciated, but Sarah knew that rumors and speculation would spread regardless of official reports. The fishing community was small and tightly connected. News of a Coast Guard boarding operation would be common knowledge before she returned to the marina, regardless of the outcome. As the Coast Guard crew prepared to cast off from her vessel, Sarah reflected on the irony of the situation. She had spent 12 years serving her country, often in dangerous conditions and hostile environments. Yet the most frightening threat to her security had come from her own government, based on accusations that had no foundation in reality. Peterson paused before leaving her boat, extending his hand in a gesture of respect between military professionals. "Thank you for your service both in the Navy and now as a productive civilian. I'm sorry this mistake happened, and I hope it doesn't discourage you from continuing your business here." Sarah shook his hand firmly, recognizing the sincerity behind his words. Peterson was a professional doing his job, following orders based on intelligence that had proven to be wrong. She held no personal animosity toward him or his crew, understanding that they had acted according to proper procedures throughout the operation. The Coast Guard vessel pulled away from Sarah's boat, leaving her alone on the deck of her floating home and business. The morning sun had climbed higher, and she could see other fishing boats heading out for their daily operations. Life in the harbor was returning to normal, but Sarah knew that her own normal had been permanently altered by the morning's events. She stood at the wheel of her boat, looking out over the waters that had become her livelihood and sanctuary. The Seahawk had survived the federal boarding operation with her integrity intact, but the experience had reminded Sarah that the security she had worked to build could be threatened by forces beyond her control. Sarah watched the Coast Guard cutter disappear over the horizon before turning her attention to the immediate challenges ahead. Her scheduled clients would be arriving at the marina within the hour, expecting their promised fishing expedition. She needed to return to port, explain the morning's delay, and somehow salvage what remained of the business day. The boat's engine turned over smoothly as Sarah began the journey back to harbor. The familiar vibration of the diesel motor and the sound of water against the hull provided some comfort after the stress of the federal boarding operation. These sensations reminded her why she had chosen this life after leaving the military, seeking peace and independence on the water. As she navigated toward port, Sarah's mind processed the implications of what had just occurred. The Coast Guard's mistake had been based on surveillance reports and intelligence that seemed credible to federal agents, but had no basis in reality. She wondered how many other innocent people might be facing similar accusations without the military credentials to quickly establish their legitimacy. Her radio crackled with a transmission from the marina's harbor master. "Seahawk, this is Harbor Control. We've had several people asking about your delayed departure this morning. Everything okay out there?" The question carried an undertone of concern that suggested word about the Coast Guard operation was already spreading through the fishing community. Sarah keyed her radio carefully, knowing that her response would be heard by other vessels in the area. "Harbor Control. Seahawk here. Had some official business to handle this morning, but everything's resolved now. Heading back to pick up my scheduled charter clients. Should be at the dock in 20 minutes. The harbor master's acknowledgement was brief but professional. Sarah knew that questions would follow once she reached port. The tight-knit fishing community would want to know why the Coast Guard had boarded her vessel, and she would need to decide how much detail to share about the morning's events. During the return trip, Sarah reflected on her military service and how it had unexpectedly saved her civilian livelihood. Her naval special warfare background had provided credibility that civilian credentials might not have carried. The irony wasn't lost on her that 12 years of military service had been necessary to prove her innocence to her own government. As the marina came into view, Sarah could see her clients waiting on the dock with their fishing gear. They appeared patient but curious about the delayed departure. She would need to explain the situation without alarming them or damaging her business reputation. Word of mouth was crucial in the charter fishing industry, and negative publicity could be devastating. Sarah maneuvered the Seahawk into her assigned slip with practiced precision. Her clients approached as she secured the mooring lines, their expressions showing a mixture of anticipation for their fishing trip and curiosity about the morning's delay. She had built her business on reliability and honesty, values that would guide her explanation of recent events. "Good morning, folks," Sarah called out as she prepared the boat for their departure. "I apologize for the delay this morning. I had to handle some official business with the Coast Guard, but everything's cleared up now. We're ready to head out and find some fish if you're still interested in going." Her primary client, a local businessman who had booked several trips with Sarah over the past year, stepped forward with concern. "Sarah, we heard there was some kind of federal investigation. Is everything all right? We're not just concerned about the fishing trip, we're worried about you personally." The genuine concern in his voice touched Sarah more than she expected. Building relationships with clients had been one of the most rewarding aspects of her civilian business. These people had come to trust her expertise and integrity, and their support during this difficult morning meant everything to her professional and personal recovery. Sarah decided to be honest about the situation while maintaining appropriate privacy about details. "There was a case of mistaken identity this morning. Federal agents thought my boat matched one they were looking for in a smuggling investigation. Once they checked my background and searched the vessel, they realized their mistake and cleared me completely." The explanation seemed to satisfy her clients' immediate concerns. They had known Sarah for months or years and had never seen anything suspicious about her operations. Her military bearing and professional conduct had always impressed them, and the morning's events seemed to confirm their positive impressions rather than raise new doubts. As they prepared to depart for their fishing expedition, Sarah felt her confidence returning. The Seahawk had survived the federal boarding operation without damage. Her reputation with existing clients remained intact, and her business could continue operating normally. The morning's crisis was transforming into an affirmation of the life she had built. The boat's engine rumbled to life as Sarah guided them out of the marina toward the fishing grounds. Her clients seemed excited about their trip, asking questions about fishing conditions and sharing stories about previous expeditions. The normalcy of their conversation helped restore Sarah's sense of professional purpose and personal stability. During the trip to the fishing grounds, Sarah monitored her radio for any additional communications from Coast Guard vessels or other authorities. The silence was reassuring. confirming that the morning's operation had been concluded and that no further official interest in her activities was anticipated. As they reached the productive fishing waters, Sarah began setting up equipment and briefing her clients on techniques and safety procedures. The familiar routine of professional charter operations felt therapeutic after the stress of the federal boarding. This was her element, where her skills and experience created value for others while building her own financial security. The first fish of the day struck one of the lines within minutes of reaching the fishing grounds. The excitement of her clients as they battled the fish reminded Sarah why she had chosen this profession. Creating positive experiences for others while working in the marine environment she loved provided satisfaction that no military assignment had ever delivered. As the successful fishing trip continued, Sarah realized that the morning's confrontation with federal authorities had actually strengthened her resolve to build her civilian life. Her military service had protected her when protection was needed, but her civilian skills and relationships would sustain her in the years ahead. 3 weeks after the Coast Guard boarding incident, Sarah received an unexpected phone call that would change her perspective on the entire experience. Lieutenant Commander Peterson was calling from his office not with official business, but with news that connected her morning of crisis to a much larger success story. "Ms. Martinez," Peterson began, "I wanted to personally update you on the investigation that mistakenly involved your vessel. The intelligence reports that led us to your boat ultimately helped us track down the actual smuggling operation. The real criminals were arrested with over $2 million worth of cocaine, and your case played a crucial role in building the evidence we needed." Sarah listened with interest as Peterson explained how the surveillance photographs of her legitimate fishing activities had helped authorities establish patterns of vessel movement in the suspected smuggling area. While her boat had been incorrectly identified as suspicious, her documented presence in those waters had actually helped confirm that smuggling operations were active in the region. The irony was remarkable. Sarah's innocent fishing operations had inadvertently provided cover for federal surveillance of the actual criminals. Her regular trips to the deep-sea fishing grounds had established a baseline of legitimate activity that made the smugglers' irregular patterns more obvious to trained observers analyzing the data. Peterson continued with information that surprised Sarah even more. "Your military service record actually became part of our investigation profile. When we realized our mistake with your vessel, we used your documented fishing activities to establish what normal, legitimate boat traffic looks like in those waters. The contrast helped us identify the real smuggling vessel." The news transformed Sarah's understanding of the morning that had nearly cost her everything. Instead of being an innocent victim of federal incompetence, she had unknowingly been part of a successful law enforcement operation. Her legitimate business activities had contributed to removing dangerous criminals from the waters where she worked every day. Sarah felt a complex mixture of emotions about this revelation: pride in having unintentionally served her country again, relief that her ordeal had contributed to something positive, and satisfaction that the real criminals had been caught. The morning that had threatened to destroy her civilian life had actually helped protect the community she served. Peterson had more news that would further change Sarah's situation. "The federal prosecutor handling the case wants to formally recognize your cooperation during our boarding operation. Your professionalism and the quality of your documentation helped our investigation in ways you probably don't realize. There may be a commendation or official recognition coming your way." The possibility of official recognition was unexpected but welcome. Sarah had cooperated fully during the boarding operation because her military training demanded nothing less, not because she expected rewards. However, formal acknowledgement of her innocence and cooperation would help repair any damage to her business reputation in the local community. More importantly, Peterson explained that the Coast Guard was reviewing its intelligence gathering and vessel identification procedures to prevent similar mistakes in the future. Sarah's case had highlighted weaknesses in their system that could affect other innocent vessel operators. Her experience would help protect others from similar ordeals. As their conversation continued, Peterson revealed something that touched Sarah deeply. Several Coast Guard personnel involved in the boarding operation had requested information about supporting veteran-owned businesses in the area. They wanted to refer their own friends and family members to Sarah's charter fishing service as a way of showing respect for her military service, and civilian success, Sarah realized that the morning's crisis had actually expanded her network of potential clients and community supporters. Word of her military background and professional handling of the federal boarding had spread through local law enforcement and military communities. Her reputation had been enhanced, rather than damaged by the incident. The conversation with Peterson concluded with an invitation that surprised Sarah. The Coast Guard was hosting a ceremony to honor the successful conclusion of the smuggling investigation, and they wanted to recognize Sarah's inadvertent contribution to the operation. The invitation represented official acknowledgement of her innocence and positive role in law enforcement success. After ending the call, Sarah walked out to the Seahawk and stood on her deck, looking over the waters that had become her home and workplace. The boat that had nearly been confiscated 3 weeks earlier was now busier than ever, with bookings extending months into the future. The crisis had somehow strengthened rather than damaged her business. Her military service had protected her when protection was needed, but her civilian skills and integrity had sustained her through the aftermath. The combination of her warrior background and her peaceful profession had created something unique and valuable in her community. She was no longer just a veteran trying to build a civilian life. She was a successful business owner whose military values enhanced her civilian success. The fishing grounds that had been the scene of surveillance and suspicion were once again simply productive waters where Sarah took clients to create positive memories and successful fishing experiences. The Seahawk cut through the same waves that had carried federal agents to her deck. But now those waters represented opportunity rather than threat. As the sun set over her marina, Sarah reflected on the unexpected ways that life could transform crisis into opportunity. The morning that had threatened to end her civilian dreams had instead validated everything she had worked to build. Her military service and civilian success had proven to be complementary rather than separate chapters in her life story. The Coast Guard had moved to confiscate her boat based on mistaken intelligence, but they had hesitated when her Special Forces credentials were revealed. That hesitation had saved not just her livelihood, but had also contributed to a successful law enforcement operation that made her community safer. Sometimes, Sarah realized, the most frightening challenges could become the most meaningful victories.